Good morning. Continuing our review of the conclusion of Ayin Beis, based on the essay which is posted, the essay I wrote, which is posted on our WhatsApp Ayin Beis group. So we are on page 37. We began the last and final chapter of this essay, where we go back to the central theme from the outset, from the beginning of Ayin Beis, the actual beginning. And we laid out the questions the Rebbe Rashab asked, 6 questions, on the Maimer Chazal, B'shah Sheikdimu Yisrael Nasel Nishma, Yordu Malachi Asharis, when the Jews at Sinai prefaced saying, Nasa we will do, and then we will hear and understand. So angels came down and weaved for them 2 crowns, one corresponding to Nasa, one corresponding to Nishma. And the Rebbe Rashab asked 6 different questions on that Maimer Chazal, comparing it also to others, where it says 3 crowns. In one place they were actually enumerate 4, but they only list 3. And with that begins the opening of Ayin Beis, and those questions never left answered. They were never answered. We're going to get back to that. To explain it, he said, what is Keser? And he brought 3 meanings from the Pardes of Ramesh Karaviro, Ramak, in what it means. One is Loshan Amtana, means pause. Second, literal crown, Keser Natara, which is the highest garment on the human body, and the Ruchnius in spiritual worlds is the highest dimension of divine expression, Keser. That was interpretation number 2. So it's the Keser, the Makif, l'chol eres Makif from the Atzilus. And 3, it's from the language surrounding. It surrounds all of Atzilus, like the Tarach Hamud E'er, the 620 pillars of light that radiate, and they are concealed faculties that radiate to the emanations. We'll discuss more what that means as we go further. But then in the language of Chassidus Chabad, the Rebbe Rashab established that Keser is Rotzen, the Mamutza. Because the first step in any given relationship is that there has to be a desire on the part of the one that is initiating the relationship with whatever that relationship would be, whether it's with an object or whether it's with a human being or any encounter. So Ratzon becomes the bridge between 2 entities, the entity that wants and what the entity wants, the subject and the object, basically. And in this context, the Eibishter employs this faculty called Ratzon to create the first interface between himself and existence. The Ratzon, like he says, like by a person. If there's no will and no desire, there's no relationship, there's no shaykhis. The words are here. That there's no connection between the 2 things in the shaykh klal. And the only possibility for a shaykhis is when there is a Ratzon. And then finally, the last paragraph we reviewed was to emphasize what this means. That this, in essence, is the whole foundation. When I called it here, I wrote it this way. The Neisa Markazi, the central theme of Hemshech Ayin Beis. And the truth, essentially, it's really the central theme of all of Torah, especially Pnimi Torah. The what? It all comes to offer us the ability to create a lahavis mamutza between Ein Sof and Elamus and the worlds. And that indeed is what all of Torah, and especially Pnimi Torah, and especially some Ayin Beis, offers us all the different stepping stones or rungs of a ladder that allow us to connect godliness to our physical, material lives. Okay, then I added, like every mamutza, every interface has to have a component of both dimensions. Like let's say Ratzon. Ratzon means is the desire of the one that wills, but it also has to define what the desire is. If it's a desire for dira b'tachtenim, desire to create a ishtalshlus, So the desire is broken into two parts. So the Mamutza has two parts to it. One is the desire part, which reflects reflects the Ratzon Elyon, and the other, which is the Habligvul Sevav Kalalman, and the second, it reflects the relationship to existence, the Pnimi, the 10 spheres that represents Hagvul, the finite energy that manifests in the Kalim and in the worlds. And through these two parts of the Mamutza, you have the interface, the bridge that connects the Elyon and Tachten, Beira and Nivra, the creator and the creation, the world, the Ein Sof and existence. I often give the example of an artist. Once an artist wants to create art, so his Ratzon is the first step, and then the Ratzon defines what you want to create. What kind of art? What specifics? And we're going to talk more about these details as we go along here, how that evolves from the Ratzon Klali to the Ratzon Prati, so to speak. But regardless, that's the two steps of the Mamutza. And that's where we stopped, and now we continue. So the continuation, I was continuing literally in the order and progression from the beginning of Ayin Beis, literally page 1, page 2, and now the development of this idea in the next chapters and Maimorim of Ayin Beis. So I'm going to be summing up now a good part of the first half of volume 1 of Ayin Beis until we get back to the discussion of the Keser, the 3 levels of Keser, and so on. So, if you're following along the text, we're on page 37 of my essay, posted again at Ayin Beis group, the WhatsApp group, and we are paragraph number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Paragraph 7 that begins Achen. And indeed, Achen means indeed. HaHemshech Maskil bePerek Aleph. The Hemshech Ayin Beis begins in chapter 1. Mebir Inyan HaKeser. Explaining what is Keser. B'chinas HaRatzon. Like we said, the level of Ratzon, desire. Quote, V'yaschil levayra hefresh ben HaKeser l'shari HaSfiris. The Rebbe Rashab himself, in the Keser, remember that part of Ayin Beis, there's a summary at the end of each chapter. So in the Keser, Lashon HaKeser, the Perek Beis of chapter 2 in Ayin Beis, he uses this expression. He begins to explain the difference between Keser and the other spheres. Remember, Keser is the highest, but then you have the 10 spheres, Chachma through Malchus. So to understand Keser, you have to understand the difference between it and the other spheres, which are called spheres Pnimim. They're imminent. Keser is a crown, a Makif, Ratzon, Umavayir. And here we go. And what does the Rebbe Rashab explain? Beprokim Beis through Memhei, from chapter 2 to chapter 45. So obviously, I'm not going to write out the whole details. You can study it inside. But here's a very brief summary of what he says in these 43 chapters, from chapter 2 to chapter 45. Once he begins talking about Keser, and he starts comparing it to the other spheres, so what does he explain? He explains Ha'inyan de'er Pnimi. Before we're going to understand Makif, Sevav Klamen, Ratzon, we need to understand what is Er Pnimi. What is this? Its counterpart, the second half of the Mamutza, so to speak. Notice the Er Pnimi, the imminent divine energy, and he explains it in context also, not just as it manifests in the Shtalshalus, in the cosmic order, but how it's also rooted before the Tzimtzum. Because when God desired to create existence, he also envisioned what existence is going to look like. And that would be the root of the Er Pnimi. So the Ratzon itself is the root of the Er Makif, of the Makifim. And as we're going to discuss, Mashashir Ein Sof lahoyer b'chinas midah v'gvul. And Ein Sof, he envisioned and allocated resources, so to speak, in Ein Sof, that he would radiate in the form of, the Elikus would radiate in the form of measure and finite parameters in order to create a structured existence. So a Ratzon is the general desire for existence, but he wants a specific type of existence. The artist wants a particular type of art. So that is what he explains in chapters 2 to 45. He explains what is this Pnimi. And is defined by a hierarchy and a structure of higher and lower, a hierarchy, the Sefiros, and 10 spheres. So the very definition of structure is already midav gvul, is measure. Eir Ein Sof on its own doesn't have structure. It's bli gvul. We'll get to that. After explaining Pnimi for these from chapter 2 to 45, what happens at chapter 46? Page 46, chapter 46 and on, Makif. Then he goes back to what is Makif? And what is its root in Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum? Which is what? Hu ha'oyer she'b'chinas Ein Sof b'chinas bli gvul. So before the Tzimtzum, now you have two tracks. One is a track, like we said, the root of Pnimi, that is how God envisions the structure of existence, the root of the Eir HaGvul, and now is the root of the Eir HaBli Gvul, of Makif, rather, is the Ein Sof and B'chinas Bli Gvul, Lifnei HaTzimtzum. V'hu B'chinas Gilui HaEtzem Sheme'eina Etzem. This is already an expression of the core, essence, that is willing all of this, that is similar to the essence, meaning it's not yet defined and limited. The Eir HaGvul is a deliberate emanation of God that will be commensurate and tailored to existence. Eir Ein Sof, Eir HaBli Gvul, is Gilui Etzem Sheme'ein Etzem v'hu l'mayla b'chinas eschalkus, and beyond structure and beyond distinction and definition. It's bli gvul. Bli gvul means no limitation. It's like the artist's capability to create infinite types of art. He hasn't defined which one. But the defined art, that's the Eir HaGvul. Hainu, Shnei Chalokim Shalom Amutze. There you have the two parts of the interface. Eir HaMislabish Be'elamis, the divine energy that will manifest within existence. Eir HaGvul, we call it. The finite Eir, light, energy. Ve'er Shalamayla Me'elamis, Eir HaBli Gvul. And the divine energy that's beyond existence, and it's an infinite Eir. Both are not the Etzem. They're already manifestations, but they're very different type of manifestations. And that is a big, big part. This sums up the first probably 45, I would say 50, 60 chapters. Okay. Any questions on this paragraph? We're going to continue. He's going to continue the discussion, and then we're going to bring it all together to understand where this is leading. But the Rebbe Shab is basically laying out, you can say, a blueprint of how the divine creates existence, and using these two tracks, which end up becoming the mamutza between Elikus and Elamus. Once it's created, then comes the Araveda to retrace the steps and climb the ladder and walk through the stepping stones to unite the two. But we'll get to that soon. Right now we're talking about the building of it, how God constructs the existence. Okay? Good. Next paragraph. Ha-mamutza misatzim. This mamutza becomes even more intensified. By the fact that the two parts of the interface, Heina er Pnimi v'Heina er Makif, Kelim habeis ktsovis. So now we go a little deeper. That each part of the mamutza encompasses both elements. In other words, there's an Eir HaGvul within the Eir HaBli Gvul, and there's an Eir HaBli Gvul within the Eir HaGvul. Ha'er Pnimi kol ma'er v'keli. The immanent energy has two parts to it, an Eir and a Keli. Even though it's immanent, it's defined energy. It's like a faculty, and the organ in which the faculty manifests. The power of vision in the eye, the power of hearing in the ear. So there's an Eir and a Keli in Chachma and Bina and so on. in the Pnimi itself. She'eru me'en ha'moyer. So though it is Eir HaGvul, but it's still the Oyer reflects the Moyer, the source. V'akelu lefi erech hanivre. And the Keli is much more in the parameters of the creation, of the creature, of the creation. That's the Pnimi. The Makif also has two components. Makif Keser, Kol Ma'atik V'arich. Keser encompasses Atik and Arich. It's not just one level. She'atik ub'chinas hatachtena sheb'maitzil. Atik is called the lowest level of the emanator, meaning the source. V'arich hu reish hanetzolin. And Arich is called the head of the emanations. So you see that both of them include two components. So it's true, this is still Eir HaBligvul, this is Eir HaGvul, Makif and Pnimi, but the Makif has a level of Makif that relates more to the source, and a level that relates more to the emanations that will come from the source, and the Pnimi has an Eir and a Keli. So this makes the Mamutze even a more, we'll call it efficient one, much more powerful, because in the Mamutze, the ultimate goal is Yichud, Hashem Echad. So the more the Mamutze encompasses both components, the more the interface takes place. So that's, yeah. Now, any questions on this paragraph before I go to the next? So continuing on, Al Pizeh, and this I put into, you'll see two hyphens, because it's not directly a flow, but I wanted to make this point. I think it's a very fundamental point. But before I read it, I'll just say it first in English, then we'll read and translate. One of the big chidushim of the Arizal is to reconcile a disagreement and two opinions among the Mukabolim Harishenim. The Kabbalists before the Arizal had a disagreement about Keser. Is Keser Ein Sof or is Keser not Ein Sof? Some say you count Keser among the Sefiros, which makes it part of the Sefiros. And some say that it's not counted as Sefiros, it's considered to be like Ein Sof. That's a disagreement. There are two different opinions in the Kabbalists. We'll soon read it inside. The Arizal comes and says both are true, because Keser is made up of two parts. Atik is not counted in the Sefiros, so it's higher, it's Ein Sof. Arich of Keser is counted, and that relates to the Sefiros. So Chiddush of the Arizal, as we'll see, Chassidus calls it that. So I'm going to make the case right now in the next paragraph that you could say, perhaps, that the Rebbe Rashab in Ayin Beis, with his central theme being Keser, is actually an explanation of the Chiddush of the Arizal. The Arizal just makes the statement, but he doesn't explain it. Ayin Beis explains it in elaborate detail. That's what this next paragraph is going to say. So let's read it inside now. Al Pizeh Ulayef Shalemer. Based on what we just said, Shanesa Merkava Shal Hemshech Terav, that the central theme of Hemshech Ayin Beis, as we mentioned before, Be'inyan HaKeser, about Keser, Shul Mamutza Ben Elikuz Ve'elamis, that it's an interface between godliness and existence. Teichen Hascholas Kol HaHemshech. That doesn't make sense. Teichen Ve'hascholas Kol HaHemshech. I have to review why I wrote that line. But anyway, bottom line is the central theme of Ayin Beis, Hu be'etzem bir b'chidush Arizal. That is fundamentally an explanation in the Chiddush of the Arizal, B'inyan HaKeser. The Chiddush of the Arizal in the idea of Keser, in what Keser is about. And what's that Chiddush? K'mavur b'dibra maskul vayelach b'hemshech tofrei samach vov. In a famous mimer called Vayelach Samach Vov. He explains, and that's based on a Tzemach Tzedek's mimer. Medibra maskil lahavan in Erein Sof Shel Tzemach Tzedek. The Vayelech, the idea is taken from the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer called Lahavan Inyan Erein Sof, which is printed in Eira Teda in Yonim, the end of page 175 and on. There they cite Shenechelku HaMekubalim, that the Mekubalim disagreed Be'inyan HaKeser imhu meminyan ha'eshes Sefiros, where the Keser is considered part of the 10 spheres. The Rabbim HaMekubalim Sfira Lahem, many of the Kabbalists, they held Shakeser Eina Nimna Be'eshes Sefiros V'nikra Ein Sof. That Keser is not counted among the spheres, it's beyond them, and it's called Ein Sof. V'haramak b'Pardes Shar Ima Ein Sof Hu HaKeser, and the Ramak in the Sefer HaPardes, the Pardes we quoted earlier, same Sefer, in a section called Im Ha Ein Sof Hu HaKeser, he has a section called Is Ein Sof Keser Nechlak Aleim. He disagrees with those Kabbalists. That Keser Gamke Miklala Eshes Sefiros. He considers Keser to be included among the 10 spheres. Just for the record, since there can be 11 spheres, those that count Keser among the spheres don't count Das. Those that don't count Keser count Das. So that way you always have 10. Not relevant right now, the whole discussion why that's the case, but I just wanted to add that in case anyone was wondering whether the disagreement is whether there's 10 or 11. No, there's no disagreement. There's always 10 spheres. The question is whether Keser is counted or not counted. Okay. V'Arizal be'Eitz Chaim Shar Mem Aleph, and Arizal in his classic work Eitz Chaim, gate or section 41, Mahichriya. That's the language in these Maimorim. He reconciles, and we're going to page 38 now. He reconciles between these two opinions, and he says that Keser hu memutza, and he uses that word. Keser is the interface. And due to the Atik level, which is the lower level of the Maitzel of the emanator, and due to that level, it's called Ein Sof. And then there's a second level in Keser, that's part of the root of the emanations. And from this perspective, from that level's point of view, Keser is counted within the spheres. So you're basically making the case that Keser has both elements, and that's the Mamutza. Now, if you think about Ayin Beis coming to explain this Mamutza, so what I'm suggesting here is that the whole Ayin Beis is really Be'etzem explaining the Chiddush of the Arizal, what it means, its implications, and all the details involved. Okay. I'll stop again. Any questions? Good. Continuing
So
on.
according to the Ramak, is the Keser part of the Sefiros? I know Nechleku Boya Mekubolim, but according to the Ramak.
We just read. Let's read inside. He says, clear. Keser nechlek aleim, that Keser gam came mechlala eshes Sefiros. It's the exact language of the Ramak.
And according to the result,
it has both elements. You didn't just read, did you hear, were you here when I just read it? That's the Hichra. That Keser has both elements. Tzad Atik or Tachtene Shebemaitzil, it's Ein Sof. Mitzad Resha Natzolim, this lower half of Keser, it's counted in the spheres. That's the Achra.
And the Ramak is not going in these details.
But Ramak disagrees. There's two different opinions, and that is Al Machriya. What's troubling you?
The Ramak knew about the Atik and Arich.
I don't know. I didn't interview him, but he clearly says he disagrees with the other Mukabalim. What about the other Mukabalim? Did they know about Atik and Arich? They may have known, and they probably did know, but they didn't make this tivuch. Maybe they see Keser as Atik. Meramak talks about Keser as Arich. That's the Arizal's Chiddush. And had they heard what that Arizal says, maybe they would have agreed with him. But that's all types of Achra like that. You have Shnei Ksuvim, Makishim Zeh, Uba Kosav Ashlishi, Machriya Beinayim. At the end of the day, the Achra works with both Psukim too. Right?
Is Arich on Atik a chidush from the Arizal or no?
Not necessarily, but the Chiddush Arizal is that Keser has an element of Ein Sof and an element of Sefiros. Atik and Arich are mentioned even in Zohar. If you want more on this, I would suggest you probably go to maybe in Sefer Erchim. He may have discussed this as more. What could be? There's also the Chiddush Arizal be'inyan hatzimtzum. You've heard of that, right? It says Haramak lo yoda me'inyan hatzimtzum. So what does that mean? Was the tzimtzum unknown till the Arizal? So there's discussions on this. I don't want to go into it right now. It's not relevant to what we're learning here.
So in Sefer Arachim, you're going to what? To Atik, Arich?
He doesn't have Erech Atik and Arich. You have to go to Erein Sof, Sefiros Shebehem. Probably there, or the Erech Eres Mitziyarim. He has a few Erechim that talk about these topics. But I would start with Vayelech and the Maimer in Tzemach Tzedek, so you can see it inside in the Maimarim and see what they say. There's more details there. I just quoted briefly. And then the Sefer Erechim, he probably has in the Miluyim some explanations on this.
Vayelech in Likutei Torah?
What? You have this? No. Vayelech and Samach Vav.
In the Tzemach Tzedek?
Why don't you look in the essay? It's all Seichen there. It's all there.
Thank you.
The page with the page numbers. Okay. Any other questions? Uba Proteus. So on second paragraph, page 38. Uba Proteus Yeser. We break this down further. Mavur by Hemshech. The Hemshech continues and explains. She has Gimel Pirushim, Dargis, Basfiras de Mamal Kalam. That the Sfiras of Mamal Kalam and Eres Pnimi, meaning Sfiras Pnimi, I should say, there are three meanings and three levels. And this is explained in chapters 83 and on in volume 1. Meloshin Mispar, Sfira from the word number, Mispar, when you count. Meloshin Sipur, Sfira is from the word Sipur, a narrative, a story. Umeloshin Evan Sapir, Sfira from the word like a sapphire, Sfira, sapphire stone, an illuminated stone, And he also explains, V'chein Gimel Dargis ba Makif the Keser. And there are also three levels in the Makif of Keser, and this is explained even later, Perek Kuf Chaf Aleph, chapter 121, and chapter 126, Ve'elech, Perek Kuf Chavav, and on. Now I'm going to break down and explain what this means. And you're going to see, we're going to get back to Keser, the three levels of Keser. We're moving along here, but it's a process. Everyone following? Okay. So here's what he says. After the Rebbe Rashab explains at length the difference between the immanent and the transcendent. Pnimi, again, energy that enters within. Makif, the energy that remains above and beyond. Shamakif u'lamayla mischalkus. The makif is higher than structure and distinction. Shalmaylo mata, of a hierarchy of higher and lower. The S is Sefiros. higher than 10 spheres. Makif is higher than Ischalkus and higher than 10 spheres. The loika maishu by Pnimi. Not the way in Pnimi. Pnimi, there is Ischalkus. There is distinction. Chachma, Bina, Das. And there's Maila Mata, Chachma is higher than Bina. Moichin is higher than Midas. But in Makif, there's no Ischalkus, there's no Maila Mata, there's no Spheres. The Rebbe Rashab, after explaining that, he asks a question, Shoyel, the Pedic Pei. In chapter 8, he asks a question. Shalacheri yesh Ischalkus es Spheres, or Maila Mata gam be'igulim. We find in Kabbalah, it says that there's 10 spheres, there's this distinction, and spheres also on the level of igulim. Igulim is makifim. Like we have igulim, there's igulim chachma, bina, in igulim also. Says the Rebbe Rashab. That seems to contradict what we learned earlier. Sha'er Makif Ayin Beis chalkus, shu b'chinas ein sof mamish. So how do you explain the idea of spheres in igulim when we find clearly spheres in igulim, and it contradicts what we said that the Makif has no distinction and no spheres? It's ein sof mamish. The Rebbe Rashab asked that question in chapter 80. And he answers, umetaretz, umavayir, and he answers and explains the following. Shamaylo mata beigulim murag beribu yamiyut. That there is a hierarchy in Igulim, but not fundamental structure. It's only in quantity of how much energy there is. So when you say, for example, Chachma has more oir than Bina, that we're not in the Igulim, we're not talking about a distinction between Chachma, but it just has more gili oir. So the difference between levels in Igulim is only based on the measure of gili, but not that there's a fundamental structure. Like, for example, the structure of the human body. The ears are not the eyes, and the nose is not the mouth, and the arms are not the legs. That's fundamental structure. But if you would say everything was one, there's only a difference that there's more gili or less gili, like he says, v'ribu yamiyut, he says that's not really ma'ilo mata. That's where the Rebbe Rashab's initial answer is. There's more to this, but that's how he begins to answer the question. But it still begs the question, we say there's spheres in the Igulim. We're not just saying there's more gili, less gili. How does he explain the concept of spheres? So here's what he says about that. In chapter 83 and on, when you say there's spheres, you do say there's chachma in Igulim and bina. Not just there's more gili, less gili. That's one thing. You could say Igulim is makif, but makifim itself, there's a makif that has a more gili and makif that has less gili. But we actually use the terms chachma, bina, das. We use these terms in the level of Igulim. Says the Rebbe Rashab, shasfiris sham heim b'chinas pshitis. The spheres there are seamless, which of course needs explanation. What does that mean? Spheres by definition seemingly means structure. Chachma, bina, as I said, chesed, gvura, teferes, etc. He calls them pshitis. In the parentheses, and this is briefly, in Ayin Beis he explains it at length. Shahari be'erein sofa bligvul shalifnei tzimtzum, because in the root of Makif, we know, in the erein sofa bligvul before the tzimtzum, where literally infinite light, without any parameters and definitions. Lamailam esas spheres sagnuzas, higher than the root of the 10 spheres, the 10 hidden spheres. Shaykh Gamkein spheres, says the Rebbe Rashab. You also can use the word spheres there. Lefi shubchinis ervi gili al kaponim. V'chol gili ayedei spheres. So he introduces a new idea, that the spheres have two aspects to it. The spheres that are actually structural spheres, chachma, bina, das, chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, ched, yesed, malchus. But sphera also is a level of gilui. Whenever something is a gilui, as we'll soon learn, even sapir, you also call that spheres. So even though it's not structured But the mere fact that it's being revealed, kol b'chinas erva gili, is through Sefiros. So that's a new idea. I mean, it's not from the Rebbe Rashab. The Alter Rebbe says it already, and other Rabbeim say it. But that's how he's answering the question by saying, yes, indeed, not just Ma'alo Mata due to Ribuy Miyut, like the first point, but there's actually Sefiros, but they're not Sefiros as in structured Sefiros, they're Sefiros as in a form that God is using channels to reveal. So they're not yet defined channels, but you can call them Sefiros. That's what the Rebbe Rashab is saying. So it's Sefiros b'chinas pshitis. There's Sefiros that are b'chinas tziyur, structure, and Sefiros that are essentially channels of revelation.
Lemailo me'esar Sefiros
In simple
agnuzos.
English.
Correct? Even lemailo me'esar Sefiros agnuzos.
L'mayla me'esar Sefiros agnuzos. Yes, he just said that. Yeah. But we need to understand what this means. What does it mean that on one hand you call it Sefiros, but then you say pshitis, that they are unshaped and they're seamless? So he's going to explain that. Ukedei levayir pshitis ha-Sefiros b'chinas igulim. In order to understand what does it mean pshitis in the level of igulim, Meirich, he elaborates the Rebbe Rashab beprokim pei gimel to kuf chav daled. So we continue the flow from chapters 83 through 124. Bahagimel perushim dargis b'inyan asfira b'chlal. So that's how he's going to explain it. That Sefiros have three meanings. Remember, Loshen Mispar, Meloshen Sipur, or Meloshen Even Sapir. So in other words, Sefiros, even though initially we think of Sefiros 10 emanations, 10, if you wish, divine instruments, divine limbs, organs, divine expressions, that's how we understand Sefiros. That Hashem has Chokhmah, is Bina, Das, and so on. But the three meanings will teach us that the Sefiros themselves become more and more subtle as you go higher. In other words, yes, there's the Sefiros as Mispar, with their very defined number, but then Sefiros are simply divine expressions. So it's going to help us understand how a Sefira becomes a mamutza between Elikus and existence. Because here's the dilemma. Elikus is Bligvul and Ein Sof. We live in a structured existence. How does Gvul and Bligvul meet? So how does Elikus and existence meet? So that's why we need a mamutza that has a component of each. So that he's going to come to explain that Sefiros themselves have a component of each. And as you climb and understand Sefiros in a deeper way, you come to appreciate the Ein Sof Shebehem, the Pshitus in the Sefiros. In other words, even though Sefiros have structure, but the truth is their structure is only on the outer level. The inner level of the Sefiros are divine emanations, and from that point of view, there's no difference between Chachma and Bina because they're both divine. It's like when we say Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu, all mitzvahs are expression of God's mitzvahs, Kedeshanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu. And then you say La niach tefillin, ala tifas talis, la hadlik ner Shabbos kedesh, al ner Shabbos kedesh, ala chilas matzah, beide priya gofen, beide mini mezenis. So you see, there's elikus in each one of them, which has definition, but they all become equalized when you start going deeper. They're all expressions of one God. And that's what the Sefiros are going to end up teaching us and helping us grow from the structure of our existence. We're going to come to understand how all of the structure is really all different emanations of godliness, to the point that it's all really ultimately all coming from Hashem Echad. But to understand that, you have to go through these levels. First Sefiros, Mispar, then Sipur, then Even Sapir, and then we can understand Sefiros in the Gulim, which is much more pshitas than the Sefiros in the Pnimim. That's the brief Nekuda, what we're going to read now inside and learn inside. Really, what I just said is a summation of all of Ayin Beis, and frankly, all of Chassidus. How structure reconnects and reunites with the divine that's beyond structure. And you need both. You need both. You need the details, because that makes the dira b'tachtenim. But you need the achdus. And you'll start seeing right now, if you think about it, this is already going to help us understand. Remember the three levels of yichud? Yichud tata on our terms, yichud ilah on God's terms, bligvul, and then the yichud of both yichudim, gvil, and bligvul. So all this is going to connect to the three levels of Keser and to everything we've been learning about Teira and Tefillah and the joining of Mamat Lamayla, Mamayla Lamata. Because Mamat Lamayla is on our terms. Mamayla Lamata is on God's terms, bligvul. And the joining of both is when they interface and become mamish like one. I'm just giving a preview of where we're going with all of this. You'll see how it all comes together. And then we can answer the questions, beginning of Ayin Beis, why, what are the two ksarim, what are the three ksarim, and so on, as you'll see. It's really very powerful. So, any questions? But we're going to read this inside. I just gave somewhat of a summary of what we're going to be reading. Preview. So I'll read the next paragraph. We're on page 38. I'm now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth paragraph on page 38 says like this. Kolomer.
So they are really not Sefiros, but they have in it, not even Sefiros ignorance, but they have in it some kind of a beginning of a Gilui.
That's on the highest level. But as they come down, they take on the shape of actual Sefiros. That's the whole point.
Compared to Sefiros ignorance, they are even less.
That's the highest level. But as they come down, they take on the shape and form of 10 spheres that become real structures. Look, in the human being, we have 10 faculties that are absolutely defined. They're not pshittas. But those 10 within us can be traced back to these highest levels, which is, of course, the whole essence of Achdus Hashem, finding Achdus within the structure.
Could you say the same thing about the Etzem and Nefesh also?
That's the most. That would be yes. Yes, you would. That there's the Koiches Gluyim, there's the Koiches Nelamim, Eser Koiches Nelamim, then there's Koiches Hiyulim, and Koiches Atzmim, and Koiches Haklulim Be'etzem HaNefesh, Nefesh Neisa Koiches. There you go.
But even Nefesh Neisei Koiches is already not pure Etzem and Nefesh, correct?
Yeah, but it's pshittis, but it's a form of, but the koiches are a level of pshittis there. Yeah, it's correct. Same thing in Atzmus. You think the level of Sfiris higher than Eses Sfiris Agnuzis is Etzem? It's not Etzem. It's Eir HaKol B'Etzem. Or Nefesh Neisei Koiches, Atzmus, Yechelis Atzmus is not Atzmus. Yechelis Atzmus would be the similar idea that Atzmus has the Yechelis Lahoyer, Yecholte Shaloi Lahoyer, the Yechelis to give off Sfiris. It's going to become clearer as we go on here. Again, I always quote the page numbers, so you could always trace the sources back if you want to learn it inside. There are literally hundreds of pages of this in Ayin Beis on this topic. I want to read one more paragraph because I think it's going to be helpful and stop there. Kolomer. This is to say, Sheba Mamutza Shel Asfiris, that the interface of the Sfiris, Shemakasher Lekusim Ha'elamis, that binds, connects godliness with existence, Yesh Beprati is Gimel Dargis. When you break it down 3 levels, Milmata Lamayla, going from the bottom up. Sfira Maloshin Mispar. Say Sfira from the word number. Hamoira, what does that indicate? As soon as you say number, 1 is not 2, 2 is not 3. Hamoira al-agbolas v'hagdoras hadavar. Number indicates on the definition and parameters of any given thing, hadover hanimna, on the thing you're counting. Shuba mispar kach v'kach. So you say $100. That's the exact example he actually gives. Or $1,000. Or $1 million. Or 100 apples. This is giving you a definition of how much you have, the quantity of that thing that you're counting. That's what Mispar is all about. That's why we count. It gives you an actual defined number. Hainu hagbola v'yischalkus mamish bekelim de eses Sefiros u'debiyah. So that refers to a real, actual, defined parameters, distinguished parameters in the kelim of the 10 spheres and of biyah bri yitzir asiyah. Sheshamu ikir inyan ha-mispar v'gvul. The primary structure and parameters of mispar, of number, and gvul and definition is in the kelim of Sefiros and of biyah. V'hakavona. What's the kavona in Avodas Hashem? Hilahamshir b'chinas bli gvul b'mispar al yidei Avodas Adam. Our mission, the human being, is to come into this world of numbers and structure and be mamshir bli gvul into it. So when you take, let's say, $100 and you give meiser $10 to tzedakah, you've been mamshir elikus into a world of numbers. Quite literally. When you take an esrig and a lulav and the dal minim and you make a brach on it, you turned it into a mitzvah. Mitzvah is bli gvul, the mitzvah of Hashem. You mamshich elikus into gvul. This is explained chapters 83. 83 to 90. The first level of what Sefiros are: mispar, structure, and our avodah is to be mamshich bli gvul into the world of mispar and structure. Yes? Want to ask something? Then we come to step 2. Next level. Beis, Sefira Meloshin Sipur. Now Sefira is coming more than just taking a number and being mamshich elikus into it. Now the Sefira itself is telling a story, a narrative. Shasfiras megalis or mesapres. The Sefiros are revealing and relating. They're actually telling a story. Hashamayim misaprim kvoit keil is the expression. Misaprim. From the word Sipur. Hamachshavas hanalomas. That's a language from Mekubalim that the Rebbe Rashab quotes. What is it revealing to us? Not just the structure of Chachma Bina and of existence. Not just the Asara Maimoris Shebehem Nivra Elam. It's revealing a story, a hidden story that the artist or the creator embedded into the 10 spheres. Mispar is telling you the structure of existence that is defined by the 10 spheres. Sipur now is telling you the story of things that are concealed thoughts. So you look at a piece of art on a superficial level, you see a structure. You see water, a tree, a bird, a person, a meadow. I'm just giving you an example. Then someone comes and says, no, there's a deeper story in this image. That Sefiros are now revealing, being that they're Eibishter Sefiros, the hidden message behind it all. The machshavas and alom is v'habilti mugbal. It's revealing also the bilti mugbal elements that are hidden and embedded within existence. B'chinas hakelim shemagalim, and the Rebbe Rashab says these are the level of the kelim that reveal, mamshichim, and draw down, umetayirim, and describe esa'er. So till in Mispar, the kelim are defining the oir. They're structuring it. They're putting it into parameters, 100, 200, whatever the number is. These are the definitions. In the second level, they're telling a story. They're being megala, the oir, and mamshich hametayir the oir, gam hamadrega she'ena shayach sham in hamispar. And also the levels of elikus where Mispar does not relate to them. It's higher than Mispar. Ad lebchinas Ein Sof shalamayla ma'atzilus, till it tells us the story of Ein Sof that's higher than Atzilus. Keil lebchinas ha'atzmi is the Esser Sefiros hagnuzes, all the way to the very core of the 10 hidden spheres. Ad lebchinas ha'Ein Sof habligvul, till it even reveals to us aspects of the Ein Sof habligvul. And this is chapters 91 to 103 if you want to look inside. And then finally, the
Spheres
Sefiros
are the Kelim.
What?
Spheres are the Kelim.
He didn't say that exactly, but they are this level is the Kelim Shemagalim, yeah, Matayra Sa'ir. For practical purposes, you could say that, yes. Then comes level 3. Sfira Malosh and Evan Sapir. Now the sphere is becoming a transparent, illuminating force. Oir. Shakelim Megalim is Sa'ir be'efin shel behirus. That the Kelim are now revealing the Oir in a behirus, it's in a bright fashion. Because even level 2, they're revealing the Oir, but it's still not in a behirus, like a Sapir. In general, this level is already inner dimension of the Kelim, which is much closer to, similar to the Oir that it contains, and it unites with the Oir. Like Evan Sapir, which is white, crystal. Gevin Atzmi or Poshet, because colors is already is some form of definition. The white is called the Gevin Atzmi, a core color, and Poshet, it's white is colorless basically. Ad lebchinas habehirus shel ha'er atzmei, to the point that it reveals the very illuminating and the brightness of the Oir itself, the Gili Etzem Ha'er, and all the way to the Gili of the Etzem Ha'er. And that's level 3, and that's explained in chapters 104 through 123. So there you see how spheres themselves are actually carriers. Think of it as stepping stones. Like I said, that as you grow in your own relationship with Hashem, the spheres help you go from Mispar to Sipur to Evan Sapir. It's not over yet. There's more. But I'm going to stop here.
So the Esser Spheres Agnosis are like the second thing, and Lemailam is Evan Sapir.
In the highest levels, yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe you could say that the Esser Spheres Agnosis, like you said, is Koilel B'chinas Ad Lib'chinas Ha'ein Sof B'li Gvul.
No, he doesn't say that. That's in level 2.
In level 2, yeah. So what is Evan Sapir higher the B'chinas Ha'ein Sof B'li Gvul?
Yeah. He just explained. Pnimi Sakelim, Etzem Ha'er. Yeah. I would, again, this is not a summary of all of Ayin Beis. Why don't you open up an Ayin Beis, these chapters, and read it inside. You'll see it more in detail. He explains it. Listen, for number 2 is 4 chapters in Ayin Beis. Number 3 is 19 chapters. So we're talking about 25 chapters in Ayin Beis just on number 2 and number 3. Obviously, I couldn't write it all out. I refer you to look there. You'll understand it a lot better. I just summed it up. Okay?
That's amazing.
Yeah. Were you here in the classes when we learned that inside back, so at least maybe 8 years ago, 9, 10 years ago, maybe?
I think, and I don't know, people will be upset. You should
It's a long
start
time
Ayin
ago.
Beis from the beginning again, inside.
It's definitely worthwhile. Okay. No one's going to be upset. Everyone loves Ayin Beis. Any other questions? Because I'm going to stop here, middle of. Okay, so we're stopping in the middle of page 38 by the paragraph Ubesima Inyan is the next paragraph. And I'll just stop it here. Yeah.